In a world where myth and legend were closely linked, the medieval era saw the use of legends as a strategic tool that kings would use to legitimize their reign. Hello, my name is Veronica. I'm a medieval historian and game designer at Paradox, and today we're going to cover the topics of legends and plagues in medieval times. Legends were used to trace their ancestors back to legitimate rulers. So one of the most important genealogies we find in medieval times is the Tree of Jesse, which is the genealogy of Jesus himself. It starts with King David at the top, because King David was the model of kings. He was just, he was wise, and he was like what every king should be. To become a legend, you had to have a very good PR department, basically. So you needed to have a good chronicle that could take your legend and transform it into something that people could care about and sing about. Many medieval legends were based on real people, and one of the main examples of how legends were used by the kings to legitimize the rule is King Arthur. And one of the first appearances of King Arthur that we have in literature is in the History of the Kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth, where he wrote a genealogy of every king of Britain, from the Trojan hero Aeneas to the king of his day. And King Arthur was such a powerful tool that Plantagenet kings would often try to imitate him. So, for example, Edward I attended several roundtable tournaments where people would just dress up and pretend to be Arthurian knights. Many legends are also the lives of saints. So hagiographies or golden legends were very important at the time. So just by dying, you could just become a legend. For example, the legend of Ulysses, that was greatly exaggerated after his death, includes a passage where people think that he killed people after his death by just scaring them with his presence. So the main purpose of these legends is to draw a parallel between the king and the legendary hero. French and German kings could often use Charlemagne as a legendary figure that they could try to imitate, and Plantagenet kings of England tried to do the same with King Arthur. By the end of the late Middle Ages, legends start to die a lot more, and it becomes focused on the figures of the kings themselves, and people knew that they were not legendary figures. Medieval times had a lot of plagues, especially towards the end, where trade became more common and more trade routes appeared, so more people were moving around. That was a huge thing for plagues. The most famous ones would be obviously the Black Death, but also the plague of Justinian in the early medieval times was also like a huge plague that completely destroyed Byzantium. In medieval times, people thought that plagues were caused by bad air, a substance called miasma emanating from corpses rotting on the streets. They thought that the reason for this was that kings were doing a very bad job, as they were representations of God on earth. Therefore, God was punishing them through the kings. So in medieval times, there was no real cure for the plagues, as they didn't have antibiotics or vaccines or modern medicine. They tried to cure them through prayer, so they could go to mass a lot and try to get God to help them. They could also try to do bloodletting. That was not very useful in most cases, because they thought that their humors were unbalanced, and that was the reason that they were getting ill. So we had the doctors that went to university, doctors that would study medicine there for like several years. They could also study astrological science and philosophy, because this was the medieval world, and they thought that astronomy had a lot to do with illnesses. We also have surgeon doctors that were a bit less prestigious, and they developed much later, like towards the late Middle Ages, but they were not be as well received as the other doctors, because they thought that surgery was like a lesser science. Noble people could have like a court physician that could attend them and their families. Sometimes they could just be in a city, and then people could just go to them, like pretty much like nowadays where you go to the doctor. The Black Death refers specifically to an outbreak of bubonic plague in the 14th century that started, we think, in the middle of the Eurasiatic steppe and moved eastwards through the Silk Road. It entered Europe through the Crimea Peninsula and the merchant ships that were like moving into the Mediterranean Sea. It spread exceptionally fast. In a few weeks and months, it covered the entire Europe. We think that the Black Death killed at least 1 to 2 thirds of the whole world population, especially in Europe. In the case of miasma, they actually tried to bury the bodies and dispose of them properly as soon as possible. In some cases, they also tried to burn it, but that had some problems with the Christian church, as burning the bodies would not allow you to go to heaven. One of the most interesting ways to counter the Black Plague happened in Venice, actually. Venice tried to install very early attempt of quarantining, so they tried to close all the inns and taverns so people could not leave their houses and just go there. They tried to burn ships that were coming from infected ports, and they just advised people to just stay home and not go on the streets. Cities were a lot more crowded than countryside, and medieval people noticed this, that a lot of more people were dying on big cities. So many that could, they tried to flee to the countryside again, and we find this in the Decameron by Boccaccio, where a group of young people flee during the plague from Florence into the countryside, and they take refuge in palaces and start telling moralizing tales and just everyday stories, trying to distract themselves from the plague. In the grand narrative of history, the medieval era stands as a vivid chapter of human endeavor. From the grand narratives of legends to the grim reality of plagues, these stories remind us of the intricate dance between power, legitimacy, and death. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed these topics in the DLC for Crusader against 3.